And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 80. That's 80. We've actually made it to 80 episodes. Now, had I gone ahead with as I intended to 2 weeks ago, that would have also been 18 months since we actually started as well. However, here I am. You might notice that we have the surrounds back here with us. We had the countdown. I have my new computer. Or massively revamped old one. My son managed to fix it. So we're back again. I'm not just me and purely a webcam. I do in fact have the software, which means tonight what we're going to be talking about is, now let me do that one. That's the one I wanted. Flip over. Tonight we're going to be talking about asymmetrical symmetry, which is basically symmetry, but not quite. Going to go into more detail about that in a little bit. Additionally, we're going to be doing a critique section after this, and we've had a couple of people put in for feedback. Vandana noticed outside the hospital, up against the gate, there was this cross hanging down next to a spooky spider web. It kind of feels a bit kind of perfect pre-Halloween. A shot. She took a shot. This is her edited version. She's wondering what she might have done different. So we're going to talk a little bit about that one. Mac took a photo of a statue, a cherub, and decided he would try and make it a bit more realistic by putting an eye into the socket, and was wondering thoughts on that. So we're going to chat a little bit about that. Rosemary was busy taking photos with a macro lens of fungus and was quite pleased with the way this turned out, but hasn't been getting the response she was expecting, so she's wondering what she might have done a bit differently. So we're going to be chatting about that. And no, not that one. And also Rosie was exploring the notion of dreich. So it's something we talked about last week or a couple of weeks ago with Ben talking about being down at Claverick, and that notion of dreich, the Scots word, which is a kind of dull, damp, grey day, dampness in the air. It's a dreich. It's kind of feels what it sounds like. So, but Rosie put these ones into the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, and was looking for a little bit of feedback as to how she might have sort of emphasised or captured that feeling a little bit more. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Close that as well. And so here we are, live on YouTube. Welcome to everybody. Leave a comment, let me know you're here. Here we are, live, unscripted as usual. Looks like I've got a few people in already, so let's take a quick look at some of the comments. Pat says, golden leaves are blowing into the bedrooms through the open French windows. Autumn in Somerset. Hi all. We don't have French windows here, but we certainly wouldn't have them open at the moment. It's got a bit wild and wet and windy up here. Yeah, Jim follows that up with, hi everyone from Dumfries, damp and dark. Yes, Dumfries being just 20 miles down the road from where I live, and we basically got the same weather pattern here tonight. Roy says, hi everyone, looking forward to tonight's podcast. Matt says, hi from Pennsylvania. Hi Matt, glad you could make it. This is Matt's first time here. Yellow Leaf Production, which I think is Helga, says, good evening. Michelle says, hi everyone from Thornbury in South Gloucestershire. Russ says, hi to all, but still doing orders on the weekend. He will be listening in though. Glad you could make it. Oh, Maggie from next door in the kitchen says, good evening everyone from a dark Castle Douglas. Rosemary says, best to all from Washington State. Jackie Scott says, hello, Jackie here from sunny South Africa. Brian says, hi all from damp Dumfries. Murphy says, hi, that's Robert. Robert says, howdy all from Texas. Meg says, good evening everyone, that's my daughter. She's currently downstairs watching on her tablet. And Egon from Norway says, good evening from Oslo. So great, we've got people in, we've got live chat. So feel free, leave comments, ask questions, allow the chat to flow. Right, so yes, it does feel a bit odd to me here. I mean, it's only it feels almost like about a month since. I mean, I was only here last week doing this, but it does feel like a month since I actually last properly did these podcasts. For anybody new who's watching in, basically what happened was a couple of weeks ago, my computer died on me. And so I skipped one podcast. Last week's was very much a kind of a workaround. And I've been waiting to get a new computer built so that I could carry on back as usual. So here we are now. Looks like Helga is saying hello to Helga in Oslo. John's coming in jumping a little late. John from Ohio is it, as is VG from India. Cool. So we've really got quite a spread of people around the world, which is always real fun. I think from Norway in the north to South Africa, from America to India. So. And even Dumfries. So what a spread. Cool. Okay, so let's get on then. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is the idea of asymmetrical symmetry. Now, I know it sounds a bit odd because it's two different words. Symmetry, we all kind of know what symmetry is, or what most people know what symmetry is. I'll talk a little. Well, basically, symmetry is the idea that everything is balanced, that the left side of the picture reflects the right, or the top part reflects the bottom. And so symmetrical has this sense of balance. Asymmetry, then, is unbalanced, and that means it's not the same on either side. And generally speaking, most photography tends to be asymmetrical. If you think about one of the first rules of photography people learn, and I hate the word rule because it isn't, it's really just a guideline of photography, is the rule of thirds. It's called the rule of thirds, and basically it's that idea of, if you, rather than putting something in the middle of the picture, you put something slightly across, about a third of the way across the picture, you'll tend to find if your key subject is a third of the way across the picture rather than in the middle, somehow it works better. And so this is one of the first things people learn is, when we start out with a photography, everything's smack bang in the middle of the picture. And then we learn, if we take it off center, quite often we end up with a much more interesting composition. Part of the problem with calling it the rule of thirds is that people can very easily get stuck with the idea that is now a rule and you have to follow it. And that if you don't follow it, somehow your picture is going to be wrong. And that's wrong. You don't have to. It should be a guideline of thirds, not a rule of thirds. It's useful. It's a very useful part of your understanding of photography, but it's not the be all and end all. Now, symmetry can be interesting a bit, but very, very quickly it gets boring. So let's show you an example then. So what I'll do is, I'm going to take a photo, and I edited out the spoon and the handle of this cup. So this, an espresso in a yellow cup, I took at a place called Earth's Crust Bakery a couple of years ago. I happened to be sitting in there. They got these lovely bright, and I looked down and noticed it was a blue tablecloth, and I thought, this is really cool. I actually had a camera with me, so I leant over, took that, and it's got this very kind of graphic design kind of feel to it. And that's good, that's fun. But once I remove the handle, and you've just got circle within a circle within a circle, everything here is symmetrical. The only bit that is slightly out is perhaps the reflection in the top part of that. But beyond that, it's circle, circle, circle inside the square, but with a vignette which is kind of circling a bit. And that's okay. But actually what happens is very, very quickly, the brain goes, okay, see that, get it, understand it, move on. There's nothing really to hold your attention. Even if you quite like it to begin with, your brain shifts very quickly away from it. Now, one of the things about, it sort of spread throughout the last 18 months of talking about composition, one of the themes that crops up quite a lot is this notion of sort of dynamic tension or tension within photography, and adding elements of tension, whether it's putting in diagonals or it's taking things away from the middle. What it means is the viewer will linger a little bit longer on it. So, okay, let's take another version of this, and there you go. I'll just stick the handle in. And now it's symmetrical still, but not quite. It's got a handle on it. And it perhaps grabs our attention for just a fraction longer. And maybe if we've got the spoon in there as well, now the symmetry of it is being broken. We're not really tempted to think of it quite so symmetrical. That's symmetrical off a bit, that's getting less. And now the core of it is still symmetrical. We've got these concentric circles, but we have broken that symmetry. And once we break that symmetry, it becomes that little bit more interesting. If we think about the way the brain has evolved, there is way too much in the world for our brains to take in and process absolutely everything we see. So we take shortcuts all the time. And very quickly the brain will look at something, and if everything is as it should be, if it can be worked out quickly, it dismisses it and moves on. The brain is actually primed to pick out and linger on and explore things that aren't quite right. Because our ancestors, those from whom we genetically descended, well, if you think about it, those who were sort of walking through the long grass and the grass all seems perfectly fine, except there's something not quite right, those ancestors who just ignored it tended to get eaten. Those ancestors who noticed something wasn't quite right and suddenly prepared may well have avoided getting eaten by some predatory animal. So we are descended from those who noticed the difference, noticed that something wasn't quite right. So our brains have evolved that way. And symmetry is a way of seeing something and you very quickly, your brain just goes, yeah, that's fine, I know where I'm at, next. When you see something which isn't quite symmetrical, when you see something which is radically different from what you're expecting, then your brain latches on, just in case there's something that it really needs to know about. Now, in terms of photography, when we're trying to get our photos seen, this can be the difference between whether somebody's scrolling past in their Instagram, Facebook feed, whatever, at high speed, and whether they just sort of see it and move on, or whether they see it and pause for a little bit. And it might only be for an extra fraction of a second, half a second, but that can make a difference in terms of the number of likes or the number of views or whatever when you're actually trying to put an image out there. Now, like I say, most of this is usually done using rule of thirds and leading lines and diagonals and what have you. But but symmetry can often get thrown out the window, thrown away. Whereas it can be quite an interesting one if you just go slightly off. So let me show you a couple of other photos then. Take something like a reflection here, where the reflection isn't exact because it's all wiggly, but it's also not the same on either side. So that doesn't sort of sit completely. Or if we take a street scene, the thrust of it is kind of symmetrical. You've got the road going right down the middle, except for the fact the buildings on either side are not exactly the same. And in this case, there's even a car slightly off to one side, and or this one, another one, where again you notice the main part is drawing you straight down the middle, and it's kind of feels symmetrical, but it's not completely symmetrical. It's not, we haven't just sort of taken one side and mirrored it over. Or even if you take something like this corridor here, what essentially makes this difference is the light. I mean, it is very, very symmetrical in terms of its layout, even to the sort of dormer windows on either side. But the difference here is because the sunlight is coming in on one side is lit up, the other side is more in shadow. And so that too has sort of broken the symmetry of it. You can have fun with front ends of cars, you know, getting a nice bit of sort of symmetrical there, but the background is slightly out. This one, we're kind of playing with it a bit more, where we're evoking the notion of symmetry by having two chess knights facing each other, except for the fact that one is black and one is white. And so it really, we've got the flavour of symmetry, but it is quite sort of broken, that idea. Sometimes you might have something like, you know, this fabulous doorway in a back street in Morocco, which we've got the doorway, we've got a couple of stools, but we've got a motorbike, and the motorbike, little moped, is sort of sitting pointing one way rather than the other. If it was pointing straight out, it would just be a bit too symmetrical. Or take something like this. This is a view of my hometown, Castle Douglas. I live somewhere up the top of the street over in the left-hand corner here. And what we have here is the sort of centre of the photo is this building, and then we have the diagonals shooting off, creating a sort of kind of symmetrical feel, except that it isn't directly, it's not breaking it. So let's take this a little bit further for a moment. So let's say I was to, okay, so some of you will have seen this before. Here's a photo shoot I did of at Crawfordland Castle, where we had butlers serving tea in the library. It was a fun kind of setup. Now, one of the second photos, one of the other photos, now this one, sorry, I should say, first of all, this one is a more typically asymmetrical photo. While we do have butlers on either side, and we've got the couple on either side, the girls are sort of like here. There's actually quite a sort of strong diagonal running up from the dog down in the left, the girl across the bits of the sari, the book, the man reading the book, the butler up in the corner. It's more diagonals. You're not tending to think too much in terms of symmetry. Whereas when we move on to something like this then becomes something where we are playing much more with the idea of a symmetrical shape. So it's not absolutely exact, but let me just show you. Let's just open this in Photoshop a moment so I can talk through this picture a moment. Let's create an extra little line here, and so in essence what we've got is we've got this sort of leaf shape that sort of comes down here and kind of comes up around like that. So there's a kind of symmetry. You can almost kind of divide it in the middle, except for the fact that then, you know, we have, so what we're doing is we're playing with the idea of symmetry, but it isn't exact. I mean, an interesting idea with this one. Let me just, if I take, let's say I take this half here, I'm going to copy, paste that onto a separate layer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit, transform, flip horizontal, and just drag that over to this side and line it up exactly symmetrically. So now we have an exact symmetrical version of this picture. And maybe to begin with, it grabs our attention because we're not quite used to seeing it. But it doesn't take long for us to kind of then go, okay, I get that. I know what I'm looking at. I've seen it. It's not going to hold my interest for very long. If I mask this, however, no, wrong button, take that and mask it, and then let's just get the brush tool back, and let's say what I'm going to do, I'll do this one a bit at a time. Let's change the butler. I'll take him out and let's just put the other butler in. Not going to be absolutely exact, but it gives us a sort of rough sense there. Now that becomes a bit more interesting because we're kind of expecting something. We're expecting more of a mirror, and something's not quite right. Or let's swap. Let's get the other daughter back in. So we've got something like this going on. And now it becomes kind of more interesting. We've got, because whilst we've now got the reflection of the women, it's not reflected in the butlers and the daughters. So, are these twins? But the reality is, if we kind of, it's pretty clear to see that it is a directly mirrored bit. So we then maybe take her out and just paint in the original. I'll actually just remove that. And there we go. The point with this being that symmetry in itself, if everything is perfectly symmetrical, we kind of get bored with it. Very quickly, it sort of loses its interest. Let me just close down. Oh, nuts. Sorry. Right, apologies about that. Hopefully I'm back again. Right. Okay. Right, my apologies. I saw closing down the pictures. I managed to close down my my browser at the same time. I'm feeling extraordinarily lucky that we've come back. Okay, so right. My apologies. Right, yes, my brain utterly scrambled there. Complete panic moment. Right, it says I didn't disappear here. Right, I disappeared off the screen. So, right, give me a moment. Let me have a sip of water here. Problem with the live, I can't edit this bit out and come back. Right. Okay. So, point I was wanting to make is when we look at something which is completely symmetrical, there might be a kind of a pleasing sense of, oh, that's well balanced. But it doesn't hold our attention. It doesn't grab us. It doesn't make us think, oh, that's interesting. It doesn't make us kind of want to linger on it for any sense. Very, very quickly the brain gets bored. But if you have something which is symmetrical or has the essence of symmetry, but then part of it is not quite, then I think what happens is the brain lingers on it for much longer. It's trying to work out. It knows it's not quite right. So it's starting to look for where the differences are. Because it's looking for where the differences are, the viewer is looking at your photo for longer. And that's really the power of it. So it's not something that you always want to use, but I think if you understand that concept, that basic concept of symmetry but not quite, I think it's a really useful one to have in your compositional toolbox. And that's really what I wanted to talk about. That's really what I wanted to demonstrate. So what I'm going to do then is I'm setting the challenge for next week. Next week, so the challenge will be for you to do your own asymmetrical symmetry photo. So I want you to create a photo which has the essence of symmetry, but not quite. I want you to think about what we've chatted about. I want you to think about the notion of what would be probably center of the photo, but something isn't quite there about it. What's going to make it feel, oh, I want to look at this just a little bit longer. And I really think it's worth going and trying and doing this. If you can, don't just sort of grab something out of your folder and go, oh, I've already got this one, I'll throw that one in. I would say have a think about it. Are there any objects in the house? Are there any objects in your garden? Are there any objects in and around where you live? Take some photos and see if you can get something, because I think the act of doing it will really kind of reinforce this idea. And once you've got it, it then becomes this sort of permanent tool that you have access to every time you go out and take photos. And it just means that every now and again, you'll come across something where you'll be trying to do rule of thirds, and you go, and this isn't working, and suddenly you go, aha, oh, maybe I should just try this. And you may well find that it works for you. I will talk again about this at the end of the podcast. Stick around and, we'll, chat about that again at the end. Right, okay, so I'll check in on the comments in a sec, and but in the meantime, just a little thing to notice is that if you are enjoying these podcasts, if you feel you're getting something out of them, if you're finding them entertaining, if you feel that it's a useful learning experience and you would like to support them in any way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the place to go. Think of it as the equivalent of a tip jar, if you know, like if you're watching a busker on the street. So that's one way of supporting. Another way of supporting: invite your friends. Let's, you know, if you can think anybody else who might benefit from watching these podcasts is wanting to look to improve their photography, then invite them along. Right. Okay. So let's take a little look at the chat. What else do we have here? Oh, Naria's here, says, "Hi everyone, sorry I'm late." Pat says, "My brain says the spoon should be under the handle. Am I wrong?" You can play with the spoon wherever you want to put it, Pat. Okay, VG says, "Well, very well explained. That's good." Maggie says, "You didn't disappear." VG says, "You are here." Phew, that's a relief. Helga says, "Agree, mirror symmetry is boring, even if it is artistic." And Jim says, "Do both sides of the asymmetrical have to be similar, not mirrored?" Well, the asymmetrical is the idea that it can be wildly different. You know, you can have glass on one side, lying down, you can have a torch on the other. You know, that's an asymmetrical. There's no balance between one side and the other. So generally speaking, when you talk about asymmetrical, you're generally talking about the idea of there not being any kind of real balance. Symmetry is all about balance. Asymmetrical symmetry is the idea that it's symmetrical but not quite. So a little bit of imbalance. So hopefully that makes... Oh, what's Meg said? Is diagonal symmetry? Not usually, but it's not out the question. I mean, you could have a diagonal running across where that kind of mirrors the other side. It's less common. Basically, when we talk about symmetry, we're talking about, is this side the same as that side? Or sometimes you might have like a sky reflected in a lake, so is the top half reflecting in the bottom? Less so. Diagonals, generally speaking, are a way of breaking the symmetry, of sort of stopping that kind of way of doing it. Okay, so hopefully that... Oh, Jim says thanks, Kim. Good. Right, so I hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do now then is move on to the critique part of the podcast. Something we've not done for a few weeks because of all the computer problems. So, for those who are new or those who need reminding, the critique section here, this is the part where you can send your images in for feedback and critique. One of the big problems we have as trying to develop ourselves as photographers is getting genuine feedback on our photos. When we put our photos up onto social media, we put them onto Instagram, we get a like or we don't. When we put them on Facebook, we get a like or we don't, or we get people saying, "Oh, that's wonderful, love this," or they don't comment. But the people who are saying wonderful, love this, maybe they're not photographers. Maybe they're just being polite, which in its own way is really lovely. People are being supportive, but it's not teaching us anything. We don't know where we've gone wrong with it. So there's very few places on the internet where you can get genuine feedback. So part of setting up these podcasts in the first place was to give a space here for you to do that. Now, if you happen to be on Facebook, I have a Facebook group called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, same as the YouTube podcast. Type that into Facebook, you'll find it, join it, and most people who submit their images submit it there. If you don't do Facebook, that's fine. You'll see my website is kimayres.co.uk. You can email me, kim@kimayres.co.uk with your image. Now, whether you're emailing it to me or you're posting it into the Facebook group, what I ask for is that you tell me about the photo and what it is about the photo you're wanting the feedback on. You know, is it about the composition? Is it about trying to get the lighting right? Is there an editing thing you're struggling with? Is it the fact that you think it's a good photo but it's not getting the kind of response you want it to? Any of it, you know, can be conceptual, it can be about editing, it can be about composition, it can be about light. Wherever your struggle is, let me know and I will do my best to help. So with that in mind, let's move on to the critique section, and let's move on to the first picture that we're going to talk about. Okay, and where are we? Well, let's start with Vandana then. So Vandana sent through this one and said, I took this picture on my last visit to the hospital before my operation. The ward for us to go into just before being admitted was behind a graveyard. Some dark humour there, she says. Anyway, saw this cross hanging so beautifully next to a giant cobweb. Had to stop and click. This was the best angle from which both cobweb and cross were visible. As you can see, it was full of sunshine. So I did a black and white version here as well. But I would be interested in having it critiqued. So, yeah, absolute. I think it's really well spotted. You've got the black painted gate, yes, and then you've noticed got the cross hanging down, got the cobweb, and the two of them together, a nice combination. As you say, up here it's quite bright and sunny, so you're perhaps not noticing it so well. When you turn it to black and white, the colour stops grabbing the attention, things like this little leaf here, or the bright background. When you go to black and white, you become less aware of that and more about contrast, and so things like the web and what have you stand out better. So, nicely observed, and a good idea to try and take the photo. Now, next thing we're up against then is what we might have done differently. And the tricky thing here really is, you say that this is the best angle to get. I tend to feel that, first of all, it's very, very portrait. It's very slim, and obviously taken with the phone has given that kind of feeling to it. And it feels like there's a lot of up and down. It also feels that that web, to me, is very... It's too steep. We're looking too stark an angle on it. I think if you manage to sort of pull round and get more of the web not completely flat on, but more round, flatter towards the camera, I think that would have worked better. The other problem is I think that the cross itself is kind of too low. With a web, our eyes get drawn to the centre of the web, and this is unsurprising because we have all these lines drawing our attention to the centre. This cross, however, tends to be right down underneath the web, and so barely noticeable. So if I open this in Photoshop, let's just close that one there, then probably, yeah, let's do what I'll do here. Let's just take a copy of that, paste it separately. If we were to move that further up like that, now in this case we would then need to get rid of the one below, so I will just quickly use the spot heal tool to remove that. So that basically what we're looking at is something more like that, and then at that point we pull this up here, maybe pull this down here a bit. And now if we open this a little bit more, that starts to become a little bit... I still think it would be nice if we just sort of turned a little bit closer to it. And then if we take that into... let's take that into Camera Raw for a quick... We'll give it a little bit of a vignette to darken down the edges a little bit. And then I think maybe what you wanted to do, you could play with the contrast a little bit more. Bring the highlights up, bring the shadows down, maybe play with the clarity, something like that. And you can see here now that this is kind of more where the interest is. In fact, you could, if this was even higher up, like that, then I think that's kind of where your real part of the story is. Your story here is where you've got the cross next to the cobweb, and in a way everything else is kind of, if it's back to that, where is the narrative in this? Where's the story? The story is the combination of the cross and the web. And so really you want them next to each other. You want them as close. Now, in order to do that, you would have had to have staged this a bit. It would have made that maybe going and taking the cross and just hoiking it up a bit until you got it level. I still think, again, you wanted it round a little bit, and then you would have got a bit more in the way of web into the picture as well. But if you look at this, I think, you kind of, this is where your story is. Your story, you've got the cross and you've got the web, and that's what whereas when we go back to your original, in order to be able to pull out so we can see the cross and the web is just, we can barely see it. It's not really getting caught in. So I think it's one of those then, Vandana, that it's a great idea, and I think it's brilliant that you spotted it, and you were certainly right to kind of convert it to black and white. That gets rid of some of the distractions of the green leaves. But essentially it's the angle you needed to do at it, the crop that you came into, and I think really it's understanding that the narrative, the story of this is about the combination of the cross and the cobweb, and so you really want those two next to each other and zoomed in, and that way I think it would be more effective. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that gives you a few little kind of thoughts and insights into that. So thank you for sending that one in. Okay. Right, okay, what have we got here? Matt says, there is something called dynamic symmetry that involves angles. The rule of thirds is basically a simplified version of one of the grids. Okay, that sounds interesting. I can't say that I've heard the term. I will look that one up then, Matt, thank you. And go and see what that says. So that'll be my homework for next week then, looking up dynamic symmetry. Okay, thank you for pointing that one out. Okay, and VG says that the cobweb looks much clearer in black and white. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so let's move on now to Mac. Now, Mac sent in this one, and he said, I took this in Dorchester, the Dorchester Old Church, then decided to bring it to life. Be interested in what you think would make it better. So bringing it to life means that what you've done is you've pasted a slightly more realistic looking eye over the existing eye, the carved eye. So it's a bit of an odd one, this, Mac, I have to say. I think there's a difficulty here on two levels. One is conceptual, the other is technical. On a technical level, let's just go technical for a moment. If we zoom in here, the background here, the level, there's a lot of noise in this photo. You're inside the church, you're taking it in low light. If we zoom in here, we can see there's a lot of noise in the picture. When we come to the eye, there's virtually no noise. This is very smoothed out, this is watery. We can see it's very clearly been cut out and stuck on. It doesn't fit. And the first rule of any composite is pretty much you want to make sure that it looks like it's going to, if you're going to put it in, you need to try and blend it, because if you don't, what happens is exactly what I've just talked about, which is we see the edit. And if we see the edit, we're thinking about the edit. We're not thinking about the concept you were trying to get across. It's a bit like I talked before. If you're watching an old TV program and you're in the story, and suddenly somebody comes into the room, slams the door, and the whole set wobbles a bit, and suddenly you're reminded you're watching a TV show, and maybe a cheaply made TV show, rather than being involved in the story. You pop out of that involvement, and instead you are aware that you're looking at something. You're not in it anymore. And as soon as you do that with an edit, if you're just looking at it going, I can see the joins, you kind of miss the trick. So if you are going to put something else in, you have to make sure that what you put in is matching the lighting, the angle, the size, and also the ISO levels and the quality of noise and what have you to fit in. The second thing on this is the conceptual part. Sticking an eye instead of the stat, I have to say I'm not convinced it actually works. I don't really know, because it's so obvious that the rest of it is a statue. Everything else is, whether it's a carving or or sculpted and put together, it could be plaster even, not totally sure, but it's clearly a construct, and the eye to me just looks out of place. I don't know that it does bring it to life as such, as just kind of look odd. So I think it's one of those things, Mac, that it's when you're trying something like I suppose maybe I'm just kind of not totally sure what it is you're trying to achieve. And if I'm not sure, then that means you haven't succeeded in getting across what you were trying to do. Bringing it to life, I think if you're going to bring something to life, it needs more than just an eye, because the nose is so obviously carved, the mouth is so obviously carved, the hair is so obviously carved. It's just that a single eye doesn't do that. It just looks like it's out of place. So I would think if that's what you're wanting to do, I would kind of go back to the drawing board and say, if I really want to kind of bring it to life, what else would I need to do in order to try and do that? But also, if you then come up with the idea of what you do want to try, you have to make sure that the editing matches up, so that whatever it is you place into the photo, if you're wanting it to appear like it should be there, then it has to match in terms of quality, noise, light, colour. I mean, you've matched the colour, but the fact that it's all very smooth doesn't match up with the noise level. So I hope that helps, Mac. Hopes it kind of gives you a couple of little starting points to think about. Cool. Okay, and Helga says there's also something odd about having one eye and the other being blank. But Jib says, good try, Mac. Good to experiment. Yep, absolutely. Experimenting is definitely a good thing. You don't learn if you don't try. This is true. Cool. Okay. Next then, we want to talk about, is Rosie. Now, Rosie, so at the beginning here, we were talking about the notion of dreich, a good Scottish word. And she was talking about the dreich weather at the Crook of Baldoon. And she took a couple of photos. We had this one. We've got the geese flying over, we've got the mist, we've got the dampness, it's dull, it's grey, dreich is a good word for it. And there was another one here where we've got ducks coming up as well, similar, same kind of misty, dark, damp landscape. And then what Rosie has asked for is for critique. And I think really the bit, first of all, I think you've caught that sense. We know that feeling. You can smell the dampness in the air. You can tell all the sounds are going to have that particular quality to them, where they're always slightly muffled, where their echoes don't quite happen as they would if it was a clear day. And certainly with the ducks and the geese, you can kind of, if you've ever stood there and you've heard them as they kind of start squawking and leaping up, you would feel that. My feeling with this, let's go to the ducks one here, is really, if you're trying to capture that, I think that sense of dreich also tends to encompass a sense of expanse. And certainly when you've got the likes of the ducks and the geese down on a place like this, I think the expanse is a really big part of it. And as such, I feel it's almost too zoomed in. So again, let's just open this in Photoshop for a moment. And let's close Vandanas. And let's come out, pull out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the content aware and show you what I mean. If we made this pretty much twice as big, you know, take it over a third, something like that, and then do the content aware fill, allow that to, yeah. Now, obviously it's not going to be as exact as if you'd actually stood back, but given it's fairly plain, that's not a bad, gives us that sense. And I think now if you look at that, if you look at those ducks in that bigger space, I think it has so much more impact. Because it isn't just about this. This isn't one of those zoom in, catch the duck in flight. This is about the ducks in an environment. And I think similarly, if we use your other photo, this one with the geese here, and if I open that in Photoshop, and we do the same thing, they're obviously flying into the picture on the right, so I would stretch that out maybe that way. Maybe actually we could come a little bit this way. Just kind of make that not quite, but close to that kind of point of thirds as such. Maybe we could do something a little bit like that. Again, we've got the content aware just to fill it in. A random cut. That's maybe a bit too big. Okay, just pull that down a little bit, something like that. But again, I think whether it's this one or it's this one, I think they both tend to benefit from that idea of the space. You want that openness, you want that sort of vastness disappearing, so that actually you have no idea whether, you know, there could be a great big mountain just the other side of that lost tree there, which we can't see, or it might be open out to the sea as far as it goes. You want that sense, you know, there's these lovely little layers in the front here where we do have, you know, it's darker here and then it's more faded here, and then we've just got that hint of the tree in the back. So fantastic layers, but I think you just need that bit more space around it, and do that, and now you really get that sense of expanse and that dreichness really, which I think is more than just in a narrow space. But lovely photos, and you know, I think it's a great place, great starting point. But this is a point whereby almost your wide angle lens would work better than your zoom lens, I think, which I know you don't usually do when you go off wildlife photography, but worth pulling one out your bag if you're trying to get a sense of the space. So hope you find that one useful, Rosie. Okay, let me close that, and come back to here. So what have we got? VG says, good editing exercise provided the inputs from taken into account. Rosie says, Rosemarie says, Rosie, you really captured dreichness. I need a jacket. Pat says the ducks work better because they are better spaced, in my opinion. VG says, ducks fly this high? Geese maybe. Yeah, ducks can fly. The ducks fly high. Maybe it depends on that. Maybe you've got different kind of ducks in Chennai in India, or you're used to them being on a pond or down. I mean, generally speaking, most ducks we tend to sort of see sort of ground level or water level, but no, they can fly high. And Inga says, lovely photo, and the extra space really added some more interest. Cool, excellent. Okay, so what we're going to do now then is we'll move on to Rosemarie. Now, Rosemarie has been photographing mushrooms, fungus, and getting in with a macro lens. Oh, Meg says, beautiful photo of the ducks and the geese. Well done, Rosie. Cool. Okay, so Rosemarie sent in, well, we'll deal with this one first. And where have we gone? All right, there we go. Rosemarie says, the photo I'm asking about is a very different style for me. Dark and moody and painterly. Oh, sorry. There we go. Here we go. Here's your picture. In fact, actually, I will just... let's try and make that a bit bigger, because I want you to see it without my head getting in the way. There you go. You also, anybody who's that interested can read the chat happening over on the right hand side at the same time. Okay, let's just put that there for the moment. It's not really working. Fill it. Okay, tell you what, let's open it with Photoshop. There we go. You can look at it now like that. So that's it. I want you to see the whole picture without getting distracted by what else is going on the screen. So Rosemary goes on to say, this shows a pair of past mature harefoot's ink spot fungus that are basically to enter a phase where they turn to black ooze. The delicately vining hairs on a different specimen caught my attention the day before, so I came back out with a 105mm macro lens to try and get a close-up. This particular photo is handheld at 320th per second. f4 ISO 400 for anyone who's interested. And came out quite dark. Now I did darken the image down a bit more to make the background less distracting and brought out the highlights in the hairs to accentuate them. So in fact, actually, if I go back to here, which she did send, that's the original version, that's her edited version. So you can see what she's done, darkening down the edges and highlighting, which I think is a good way to edit it. Let's go back to here, carry on with what she's saying. With such a narrow focal plane, most of the focus is quite soft, which I think adds to the dark mood of the lighting and the fragility of the mushroom caps. This image has gone over very poorly on PhotoCrowd. Now, PhotoCrowd, for those who aren't so sure, is another one of these sites, or one of the sites which is a competition site. It's every single day they have anything between 1 and 8, or between 3 and 8 competitions. You set up your account, you enter whatever photos you want, and then you may score highly, score badly. These things are fun. I think quite a few people who watch these podcasts have come from PhotoCrowd, and sometimes it's a good way of getting that external look on your images. It's not, it's not. I've talked before about the fact that you can't necessarily take it as a proper objective comment on your photos. These sort of mass voting sites have their own agendas, have their own, you tend to find things that are more subtle get lost. And I suppose there's to go back to what Rosemary is saying here. She says, this image has gone over very poorly on PhotoCrowd, which my husband asked why, since he really likes this one. Might it be due to the soft focus? I'm not sure about the framing, which is uncropped, since I started out so tight. This is a violation of your mantra, give it room to breathe. I would appreciate any ideas for improving this shot. Well, okay, first of all, I think I don't worry about you having gone in too tight as such. When I talk about give it room to breathe, that generally speaking, most photos are either improved by stepping back a bit or actually zooming in a bit. And when you're talking about macro, generally speaking, it's about zooming in a bit. Now, my first impression with this is it's very favourable. I like the colours. I like the textures. I like the greys and the pale areas and what have you. I think you're definitely onto something here. I think it's a photo that made me stop and go, ooh, what is this? Let me take a little better look at this. Now, the first thing, what I would say though, is in compositional terms, what happens is the eye is getting drawn to two bits. The eye gets drawn in when you've got a narrow focal plane, so that there's bits that are out of focus and bits that are in sharp focus. The eye gets drawn to the bits that are more sharply in focus. Similarly, when you have light patches against dark patches, your eye gets drawn to the light patches. Unless it's predominantly light and then you have a dark patch, in which case your eye gets drawn to the dark. Basically, your eye gets drawn to the place of contrast. It's where those bits meet, where light and dark meet. That's where your eye gets drawn to. Now, in terms of, let's just stick, if I do this, in terms of this is where the eye gets drawn straight to. It's the brightest part, we've got the brightest patch of the picture, and we've got the sharpest part of the picture. So this is where it's drawn. However, it's not only here, because there's a secondary bit which is grabbing our attention up here. Now, the thing is with this bit here is really quite central. This bit is off now, but it's not in a kind of asymmetrical symmetry. It feels like you've got dual stuff going on here. All the concentration is on here because that's where the eye is getting drawn to. And yet, when we zoom into this bit's actually, there's more of this in focus. Now, you've not highlighted it as much. And there's a little bit with the composition where actually, I think you either needed to be sort of closer in, like that, to make the most of this, or you should maybe have pulled out and got more of this in, or actually just shifted the whole thing right a bit, or right and up a bit, and actually maybe got both of them in, maybe tilted the camera, maybe, you know, if you'd rotated it a little bit like that, had the two of them on a diagonal, had this one in full here and this one in full here. Now, I don't suppose if I do content aware it will actually... Oh, let's try that again. Okay. But in essence, you would... if this was filled in, you would sort of get that sense of... And then actually, you might get slightly more drawn to this one. And you could have highlighted that one. So I think there's partly it's a compositional thing. The other thing is to go back to the why isn't it doing so well on PhotoCrowd. PhotoCrowd and a lot of these mass voting sites, as I said earlier, the subtlety gets lost, softness gets lost. Basically, bright and loud gets noticed. If you think the way that most people are consuming their images, they are scrolling quite often at high speed. They've got, if they're voting, they've decided they've got to vote on a minimum of 50 or 100 photos. They don't want to spend 20 minutes doing that. They want to spend 2 minutes doing that, or less if they can get away with it. And so nobody lingers on the photos unless they really do grab the attention. And when you are seeing loads of photos all together and scrolling fast, your brain just starts blanking most of them out. And it tends to be the louder ones, the more garish ones, the ones that are unsubtle, that are most likely to grab your attention. So if the theme is red, then you want, you know, a lot of red, big bowl. You want a bright big red rose filling the screen, you know. If it's yellow, big yellow flower, or big yellow sky, or big yellow inflatable duck or something. Basically subtlety gets lost. Now a photo like this is all about the subtlety. It's soft, it's gentle, it works best when you spend the time to look at it. You have to stop and absorb it, and when you do that, it's really beautiful. There's a lot of really beautiful elements to it. Now, like I say, compositionally, I would change it. I feel that it doesn't quite balance right. But I don't think that's the PhotoCrowd problem. I think the PhotoCrowd problem is basically it's too soft and it's too subtle. And it really, the PhotoCrowd isn't the audience for this particular photo or a photo like this. Because it requires you to stop and think and explore. And when people are only spending less than half a second per image that they're looking at, they're not going to take the time to stop and look and explore. And so that's really what's working against you. It's not that it's a bad photo, it's just PhotoCrowd is the wrong place to put it. So I hope that kind of makes sense. I mean, let's compare this then, because you did actually send a second photo, which was this one, where you said, I'm also tucking in a different photo taken a few days later that shows earlier phase in the life of the hare's footing spot. This shot seems lively and cheerful to me because of the backlighting and the very early morning sun and the healthy greenery. Also, for this shot, I was able to use a beanbag to support my camera. Trusty little beanbags, always a handy little thing. You can rest your camera on them. And then that allowed you to get much sharper as a focus because you were able to do a quarter of a second without it going blurred because the camera was steady. Allowed you to have a deeper depth of field and because you could go slower, you could have a higher ISO. Again, the crop may not be the best. I'm open to suggestions to improving this image. Now, automatically, you see, if you're then going, if you're putting in a picture for, and the title is mushrooms or fungus, this grabs the attention much more quickly. Now, I think your previous photo, I think, that's a more interesting photo for me, but then I'm spending time looking at it. But if you're scrolling through and you're talking about a photo crowd photo, this would grab the attention more quickly. Now, what I would say with this is it feels like, again, really, had you shifted this over to the right when you took the photo, it would have worked better. These two here look like they are, the whole thing looks like it's kind of heading off to the right, and there's a great big patch over on the left of the photo here which isn't really doing anything. You kind of feel like the edge of the photo needs to be roughly where this leaf is, and then you need a bit more over onto the right of it. So if I just open that in Photoshop, and we'll go content aware, we'll take this crop and we do something like that. You can even have these mushrooms in the middle because you've got that leaf coming over into the left there. Okay, it hasn't done the content aware. Let's try that again and see whether it will. No, okay, for some reason it doesn't seem to want to do the content aware. Why isn't it doing that? That's annoying. Okay, there's another thing I'm going to have to go and figure out later. I seem to remember I have to, if I kind of do something more like that, it might. Yes, doesn't seem to like it if I don't actually adjust the thing. So you can see if you've got something like that, or maybe actually even a little bit slightly further over. Now, obviously this bit here is just being made up by Photoshop, but can you see that I think actually this leaf sits better on the left. You have a little bit more space, you're kind of getting drawn into the right, and I think that sort of feels a slightly more comfortable kind of photo. And then in terms of editing, there's a couple of different ways you could go. I think certainly you could play around with a vignette in this, just kind of pull the corners in a touch. Now, maybe also you could just kind of darken it down a little bit. I think some of this background is kind of almost too bright. I think if you darken it, well, let's take the shadows. If we take the shadow, take shadows down, exposure down a little bit, maybe bring up the whites a touch just to kind of, all the highlights a little bit, maybe play with that clarity. Yeah, that's kind of slightly a little bit more, I think. Maybe bring those shadows back up a little bit, something like that. Now, the other thing here is the color scheme. You can shift it into the blues, which creates cooler, or you can just nudge it into the yellows a little bit and make it just that little bit warmer, which gives that slightly more autumnal kind of feel to it. I think also maybe works a bit. So you can see then that editing wise, that sort of brings much more attention into the mushrooms that you've got. So I think with this, it's really a case of, like I said, I think as photos go, I think your other one is the nicer photo. In terms of something like a photo crowd thing with a title like mushrooms or fungus, I could almost guarantee this one would do better. Quite simply because it's much more of it sort of, there's the phrase, it does what it says on the tin. This is, you say, this is what the title is, this matches the title. It's an easy tick, it's an easy like for somebody who's scrolling through at high speed. So I hope that gives you some insights there, Rosemary. To understand that crowd sites don't always work in the same way that, well, you also have to remember that a lot of the people who are on the crowd sites, they're not professional photographers. Yes, there are some quite skilled, there are some professionals and there are some very skilled amateurs on there, but it's mostly made up from people who are just starting out, just beginning. They don't look at photos in the same way a more experienced photographer looks at photos. And because they're maybe voting on them and they're wanting to get through 50 photos in the next couple of minutes, they are spending barely a second on each photo. So you're not getting that chance for people to really look and take in and absorb the subtleties and the beauty that you found. You found it, you've spent a lot of time, and then you've gone in and edited and you spent a lot of time on that photo. And if that photo, or the best version of that photo, was then printed up and put on a wall, somebody else, if they were looking at it because it was on a wall, would take the time to look at it. But because it's on a screen being scrolled past, it isn't. And so that kind of subtlety is getting lost. So understand then that whilst there is a place for online mass voting sites, and I take part in 2 or 3 of them, and there's things to be gained from them, you have to be aware of the fact that they're not always the best place for judging something which is a bit more intricate or a bit more subtle. The other thing is to go back to that balance. I think the balance is slightly wrong with that picture, where you've got the secondary one half disappearing out the photo, which actually is in slightly more focus and almost feels like you should have shifted the camera over and got that one as perhaps your primary one. But really well spotted, and some lovely bits in there. So I hope you found that useful. Right, okay, let's close those two and see what else we've got. Okay, couple of... So Pat says, I love the delicacy of this. VG says, beautiful textures. Helga says, like this macro, perhaps slight crop on the left side to get rid of the end of the next form. VG says, would love to have this as a wallpaper on my laptop. Inga says, very interesting macro, makes me stop. Helga says, I agree with what you said about photo crowd or guru shots, etc. I evaluate differently when I run a competition myself, and I have to spend a lot more time evaluating photos and also to see them several times. Absolutely. If you're judging a photo because you are judging the competition, you spend a lot more time with the image than if you're just randomly scrolling through voting in order to get your points or whatever. Okay, VG says, wish to get closer. Rosemary says, great, these suggestions were all very helpful, thanks very much. Now I'll see. Now I'll have to see if I can find some more hare's foot fungi to try that first shot with a better composition. Excellent. Cool, right, okay, so this is bringing us pretty much towards the end of the podcast, unless anybody has any burning questions they want to throw in at the last moment. So again, if you found this interesting, useful, entertaining, and would like to support the podcast, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Also, we're here on YouTube. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, click the little notification bell so that you know what else is coming along. And also, I write a blog. You look at kimayres.blogspot.com. Or is it blogspot.kimayres.com? You can read it. kimayres.blogspot.com. Just there. That one. Every week after the podcast on a Wednesday morning, I write a blog, which is quite often attached to, is to do with the podcast that I put on, but sometimes it goes wildly off on a tangent. Now, tomorrow's blog post will be talking a bit more about this notion of asymmetrical symmetry, because it's leading towards next week's challenge. I really do hope as many of you will take part as you can. So think about this whole notion of asymmetrical symmetry. What you're wanting is something which is, the core of it feels symmetrical, except that it's not quite. So if necessary, go back, watch the beginning of this again, read my blog post tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon by the time it's up, and then submit your images. Just one per person, please. If you are on Facebook, go to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, stick your image in there. Tell me a little bit about it as well. Tell me what the photo is, why you've chosen it, any interesting anecdotes about the creation of it, or if you get particularly stuck, if you end up with a photo that you really thought was there but you're still struggling with it, let me know as well, and I can give you a little bit of feedback on it. If you don't do Facebook, email it to me. Like I say, kim@kimayres.co.uk will get to me, and again, let me know a little bit about the story behind it. So I think that's pretty much about it. Thank you ever so much to everybody turning up. I'm so relieved that when I accidentally closed the browser, we didn't actually completely lose the stream. The problem of live broadcasting, and I can't even edit it out. If I was to go in and edit this out, we would lose the copy of all the comments. Meanwhile, this was episode 80. There are 79 other episodes to go and explore if you really have the time and the will to do so. So thank you very much once again. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you will see you all next week, and I look forward to seeing what images you're likely to put in. Take care. Cheerio.